All right, today I wanted to make a video about Langchain, which is a Ruby gem, um, and I'm going to show how you integrate that into a Rails application. So the very first video that I'm going to do, this will be part of a two-part series. This one is just going to cover how to get it initially set up. So it does require that you have a Postgres database, and that database has vector enabled. And so I'm going to go through that process, how to pull that down, set it up in a Docker container, and then configure it for your use, and then configure the application. So that's kind of a long process. So originally I was just going to do one video with setting this up, um, and then showing how to use it. So this one's just going to go into just the setup and the basic Rails utilization, or Ruby on Rails utilization of the app. Um, the next video I'll go into how to set up an assistant and how to use background jobs with the assistant to have it perform tasks. So really, this is the initial step. So the end result, if once you have this set up, is you can have an assistant, you can define tools, and those tools can be functions in your Ruby application that the assistant knows how to execute. So it's kind of a pretty useful process. So in my last video, when I was using the nanobots library or gem, I was tooling that stuff up by hand as far as how it executes things. And so this is really cool because, my old process required that I had a lot of these nanobots set up to do different tasks. This is more of I'm probably going to set up one assistant for my entire application, or for a good part of it. Um, so this is a really cool product. So let's go over to their website really quick. So this is the library. It's a Langchain.rb Rails, and this is the Rails implementation of Lanchain.rb. Um, so going through this implementation, we're gonna, you know, add the library to our Rails environment. We're gonna use some of the generators, and what these generators really do is they set up vectors for your database models. So you'll have a vector for each one of your records. And so that really almost makes it easier for your large language models to interact and understand your database or what's in your database. And as a result, you can do some really cool things with that. So, for example, you can ask it questions. So the product would be your Rails model, and then you can ask it a question. So you can actually ask it some pretty intelligent questions, and it will kind of look at your data and then respond. So that's super neat. I think it could be used for customer experience as far as querying it. It could be used in maybe dashboards. Maybe you have a business dashboard and you can have an executive ask questions of the application or even the user. Um, and so that's a base. That's one of the functions, and then another function is a similarity search. So this is like the ability, it gives it the ability to search. So both of these. So the first one returns a plain text response. This one actually will return records that match that response. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but if you go into the library itself, so this is the library that gets included with this LangChain Rails setup. You can It allows you to use different LLMs, so it has a standardized interface. Um, let's get to So very simply, you can set up the LLM by passing in some basic configuration. Once you have that set up, you can actually let me show you some of the use cases that I'm using it for. Let me get to it here. This is where I think the uh, the magic is. So the magic in my mind is really the assistants. Um, so with the assistant, this is basically a language model that you interact with. It has tools, um, and those tools it can then execute. So, just on the very basic implementation, you would set up the large language model. It's looking at your environmental variable for your API key. You give it to that assistance, you pass which large language model you're using. So you could use different large language models for different tasks. Um, you can tell it your basic instructions, and then you can provide tools. So here is kind of a complicated version. Now you can pass in your own tools, and there's some built-in tools. So there's a calculator, there's a few other options that you can use. So let's go down to, let's see. Okay, so here's an example of a tool. So in this case, we've set up a movie info tool. Okay, and so this is the basic setup. You have this extend LangChain tool definition. You define the function, you initialize it, and you have functions. So these functions can be called by your large language model, your assistant, because of this defined function up here. So it's saying that I have a search movie function. It tells, um, let me reduce the size. It it tells what the description of that thing is. It gives some properties for the input parameters. You know what type they are, if they're a string, an integer, what they are, and so it knows how to interact with it. So once you have this defined, your assistant can then call it. So you're not only you not only can you make external calls, but you can make calls directly into your application. I think that's super interesting, and so you can have as many functions as you want in here defined, and then it can interact with it. And you can have multiple tools. So once you have your tool set up, you can then reference that tool, right? So you basically set that up as a variable or an object, and then you can pass it in as an available tool. Okay. Then what you can do is you can add a message to it and run, and it can execute the command and then use the tool if it deems necessary. So I just wanted to give you kind of an overview what is possible and why it may be worth going through this process of doing the setup, because it's a lot, and initially it seems like maybe it's not worth it. So in this video, we're going to go through and set up the Postgres vector setup. We're going to do the Langchain.rb Rails setup. And then we're going to just show the basic interactions that I've shown here, which is once that's set up, hey, we can query our records, we can search them using the large language models. And then once that basic functionality is, we can then step into how do we set up the assistants, how do the assistants how do we set up those tools for the assistants to use in our environment. But I felt like in one video it would be too much to go through this whole process. And then go into that process too. So it'd just be too long. So I just wanted to make this short so you guys can get going, and then we can go get further into it later. So let's go into the process. So I'm just going to show this to you guys just as an overview really quick so you can see it. Why can I see that? It's weird. All right. So here are my notes on this process. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to set up a vector for your Postgres database. So if you log into your Postgres database and are able to run this create extension vector command, then you don't have to do the rest of the stuff that I'm showing you. And I hope that's true for you. But for me, it was not. I was using a Postgres Docker image. That image wasn't set up with vector. So I had to download a new Docker image. So I used this Docker pull command. Let me zoom in maybe. Actually, I can't really. So Docker pull Lanchain PG vector. So I'll make this whole document available too with this video. So it's available. So once you pull down that Docker image, you're then gonna run that Docker image for the very first time. And what's important with this is you need to supply the root password for the Postgres installation. So once you set that up, you're then able to you would connect to the Docker, and then you would connect to the SQL environment with your Postgres account, and then you'd create your database user. You would install some tools in that environment just so you can interact with it and configure it. Once it's all configured, so there's some steps here that we'll go through. Then you would install the Langchain library into your Rails application and interact with it. So I just wanted to give you an overview of that process before I start, because we're going to start going through that here. All right, so let's begin. All right, so so the first thing, so I'm going to run through this as if you don't have a working Docker or a working Postgres database. So we're going to first start by pulling in that Docker image, so pg vector. So that would be the command that you would run, docker pull ncain pg vector. And so what that's going to do is pull down the latest Docker image. Now I've already pulled it down, but but that would be the command that you would run. Let me make this a little larger, so oops, so you guys can see this. All right. So that would be the command that you would run. And then once that's ran, you would run the docker run e. And so this is really, you're passing in this environmental variable to it. And this would be your password for your environment. Okay, so this is the password for the Postgres user to log into the database, which is the admin account. So it won't actually run successfully unless you do this step. So you have to do this to get it to work initially. All right, so you're going to run this with this environmental variable with your password, and then you're going to run it against this Docker image. So it should find this. Once you run that, you can do docker.ps, and this is going to show you you're running Docker images. So this is the one, the ncain pg vector, the latest. That's the one that we are concerned about. So now, in order to get into the console for this Docker image, we can run docker exec-it, and this is where we're going to pull in this container identifier to connect to the system. So we'll do 0A, 7D, CD, 46, BE, 8C. And then we're going to do bin bash. So this is going to connect to that Docker image and execute a bash or a console for us. And now I'm in there. So now I'm in there. I have the root account. Now at this point, I can connect to the Postgres database. So I'm going to do psql-u Postgres. So this is going to log into the super user for the database. All right, so now you're going to use the password that you set up earlier. Now that we have it set up, now we want to create our user account and database for setting up. So we're going to set up the database for Rails, and we're also going to configure it so that it has the vector installed. So let's just go ahead and create the role for the development environment. So I'm going to call my Rails application will be Langchain demo, and then it's going to be the development database for that. So I'm going to create the role. So this is going to be the user account, and it's going to match the database. That's usually how I do it in development, just so it's very obvious. So it's created the role. Now we got to set the password for that environment. So Langchain demo development. It's going to prompt me. Oh, my password didn't match. All right, so we've set the password. Now we want to create the make sure that the user can create a database, log into it. We set up the connection. We actually make it a super user. So you have to make this account a super user while you do this. You set it up with the vector extension, And then also when you go through the first part of the install for the vector database gem, it will need that as well. So once you've done that, you can remove that super user role. So ultra role Langchain demo development with create DB. So now it can create a database. We just gave it the ability to log in. So we're going to set the connection limit to 1,000. Oops. I'm just making this as real as possible with the typing, so no copy and paste. This is raw, uncut. All my videos are uncut. It's just me doing my thing. All right, so we gave the super user count. Now we need to create the database. So create database, Langchain, demo development. We got to set the owner, and so that's going to be the same as the user. So I set up a role, which is a user. I'm creating the database. Now I'm going to make the owner of the database the Langchain demo development. So let's do that. Langchain demo development. All right, so created the database. Now we can create the extension vector. So this would be give us the vector extension. Now I already have it set up, but this, if you didn't have it set up at this point, it would set that up. So, all right. So we have set up the user for Postgres. We have set up the vector. We went through, we pulled the image. We then connected the image. We set up the user account. Now let's get out of Postgres. So now we're back in the Docker image as root. Now the Postgres install, and I'm doing this because inevitably you guys will struggle with dealing with not being able to connect to your Postgres Docker image. So I'm just going to include it. You may already know this. Hopefully this helps. So one thing that you want to do next is you want to install a editor. You can install whatever you want. I'm going to install Vim. You can install Nano or whatever you would like. This is just super lightweight, so it's not going to install a ton of stuff. I already have it installed, but that's what you'd want to do to install it. Now, so the reason why we're installing an editor is because we have to change some of the configuration files for Postgres in order for the Postgres database to listen to external connections from our application. Okay, so now the next question is where are those configuration files located? And so if you don't know where that's at, you can run this find command. So find in the root directory, and then we can tell it what are we looking for. And in this case, we're looking for this Postgres hba.conf file. And this file actually tells Postgres where to listen, what addresses to listen on, and also how to authenticate on those databases. Like, is it going to use the internal authentication by the user accounts, or is it going to use a login and password authentication? We need to set that up so our Rails application can log into it. So we've set that. We're going to search for this now. And then it tells us that it's in this varlib PostgreSQL data folder. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to just jump to that directory. So, well, there's one other thing that we need to know, and that is what is the IP address for our container. So if we do ifconfig, we can see that our address is 172.17.0.3. So this is important. This is also important because depending on the order of your Docker containers and the way that you have Docker set up, these may change. So I found that if I stop one and start another one, it may assume the other one's IP address. And so you need to be aware of that, and this is how you can check it. Okay, so, all right. Hopefully I'm not boring you guys with that. So going back to this location, we need to change into this this lib Postgres data folder. So we're going to change into that directory. And in here we have a bunch of different configuration files. Now the ones that we need to edit are the pg_hba.conf and also the Postgres SQL.conf. So let's do that. So we're going to edit that file. Okay, and what we need to do here is we need to add this line here. And you may notice that you have a lot of these other ones set up as trust. You need at the very least you need to add a line for the host for all users and all databases. And I have it listening on the 0.0.0.0 port because I don't want to have to change this every time my IP address changes. But you can put in that 172.17.03 IP address, and I believe it's going to be /16 because it's in that subnet. But this is probably the easiest way to get started. So you set that line in there. So right here. All right, so let's just quit out of that. And the next thing we want to do is we want to edit our Postgres SQL.conf. And this has some basic configuration for Postgres and what port to listen to. Now, by default, it actually has the port commented out. So you'll need to uncomment that out. And then the listen address, you may want to look at that. Just set it to star if it's not, because that may be hampering your ability to connect to the database. All right. So let's save this, get out of it. So now what we want to do is we want to get out of this Docker image. We want to restart this Docker image, so we can do docker.ps again, and that's going to show us the container ID. The container ID is how we're going to interact with it. So we're actually going to tell it now that we want to restart that container. So 0A7D CD46BE8C, and again, that's right here. Okay, I also have a Postgres Docker running as well. So this will restart that container. Boom. Now, something that I use is Lazy Docker, and I would recommend using Lazy Docker if you don't have it. And that makes some of the stuff that we've done a lot easier. This is Lazy Docker right here. Like for example, it's much easier to like interact with it. So I can hit E and I automatically go into the root console. That's so much easier than figuring out the container image and then running the command for connecting to the bash session. I can also restart it and restart it from this interface. So I'd recommend Lazy Docker if you don't have it. So I just wanted to bring that up. Okay, so we've started that container. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is let's just create a new Rails application called Langchain demo. So we are in the projects folder, so let's just do Rails new. Langchain demo is the name of our app. We're going to use the database PostgreSQL. Now, there's other ways to use vector databases with Lanchain.rb. This one's just the easiest, I think. There's some other gems that you can use, but I'm just going to show you this one. So this is really key to do some of that, I guess, natural language searching your interaction with your Rails application. I think that's really an important feature. And so I think as you start using this, you'll understand how that's useful. Okay, so Rails chain, new Langchain demo, and we're going to do the database PostgreSQL. I'm going to do Tailwind as my CSS. Now you can use whatever you like. I'm just so used to using it now until whatever I decide to use next. But this is, my brain thinks in Tailwind, unfortunately. So we're going to run that command. And this will generate our new Rails application, Langchain demo. All right. So now let's go into our application, and let's go into config directory, and then you'll have your database YAML. So we're going to edit that really quick. So in this file, it doesn't actually have the username set up already, so we want to do Langchain demo underscore development. Oops. And that's what we called it earlier. And I've been using Rails forever, so historically this was how it was set up. So this not using a configuration that might be easier, I guess, for people that just use a Postgres install that allows local connections and they're off and running. But I'm just used to doing it this way. Especially when you use Docker images, you just, you never know what you're going to get. So password is going to be the password that I set. So I just set this password, so you guys can use whatever you want. Now the host, this is where that IP address comes in handy. So we want to do 172.17.0.3. And the port, that's the port we want. So if you had a different port than that set up, when you did your configuration, you would need to change that. All right, so we've set up, we've pulled the Docker image down, we've configured the Docker image, we've allowed remote connections. We have turned on the vector extension. We've created the user account, created the database. So let's go back to our root directory of our application. Let's go ahead and run the db migrate command. Now we haven't really added anything yet to this, so let's go ahead and create a scaffold of posts. Now we could do this whatever we want. I'm just going to do this because that's what's traditionally done with these demos. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll just generate a scaffold for post. We'll give it a title that's a string and a body that's text. Okay. So we are going to get into the Langchain piece of this shortly. So let's do that. So let's migrate that new fancy post database schema. So we've done that. Now we're going to open up a Rails console, and we're just going to create some posts here. And I'm doing this because, later on, I'm just creating some data to show you some of the functionality really quick of Lanchain.rb because, this video is getting long in the tooth. So post create a title. Let's just call this Langchain demo. Let's do body. This is a demo of setting up Langchain. Langchain allows you to set up, or allows you to interact with large language models within your Ruby or Ruby on Rails application. It also has assistance which can use tools. So cool. It's the future. All right. So I've created that post. So I'm going to create another one, and it's going to called, we'll do nanobot demo body. I thought nanobots were so cool. As they had cartridges. So I love the cartridges. I love the idea of having cartridges because, you're configuring these bots to do different things. The nanobot demo that I did kind of showed that. I think in some ways it was really useful, but as far as the tools application of it, I think I might like this more, but I didn't try the tools functionality in nanobots to be a good judge of that. So I need to get back into that. But at the time I was using that, I was only using Olama, which didn't have the tools functionality built into the nanobots at the time. It was only for OpenAI. All right. So I'm going to create this. What did I do? Okay. All right, so we have the posts installed. So we have some basic posts. And so I've created some data. So let's go ahead and we're back into my directory or into the application directory. Let's add finally, all that work just to get to square one. Um, uh, let's add Langchain.rb Rails to our application. All right, so we've added that. So let's install that. All right, so this application comes with different generators. So I'm going to get into the very first generator, which makes uh, the Langchain RB gem aware of our models. And so I'm going to make it aware of our post model. It's going to set up vectors on our records, which then it can use to interact with. Super important step. So if you want it to interact with different models in your database, then it's good to do this step. So we're going to do that. And this will require you to run a migration afterwards and potentially install some gems, depending on what you've chosen for your options for the Langchain library. So there's different options that require different gems that may need to be installed. So Lanchain.rb Rails, PG vector. So we're saying use the PG vector. So there's pinecone and some other options. I won't get into that. Model equals, we're going to do post because that's what the record we just created up here, or the model that we just created. And then we're going to tell it to use OpenAI. So it's going to use OpenAI. Now you can add different models you can have different models interact with different large language models. So that is the command. Now you'll notice that it adds some migrations in here. So enable vector extension. So it's going to put that on your post table. Well, it's going to run that enable vector extension on the database, and that's if you don't have your account, if it doesn't have super user access when it runs its first migration, it's going to fail. So that's why you need to have it. I went ahead and ran it anyways, but it would bomb out on this if you try to do it otherwise. So let's go ahead and run the db migrate. Oops. All right, so it's ran those migrations. Now let's jump back into the console. And there's one command that we need to run to, actually, there's one other thing that we need to do. So you need to export an environmental variable that has your API key, and that whatever that may be, so you need to make that environmental variable available for you or for the application, or under the config initializers directory, there is a Lanchain.rb Rails library or file. So here you can set your key directly. I wouldn't recommend that. This is probably a better process, but that's where you could set it if you didn't want to set it as an environmental variable. Okay. Now I would recommend doing an environmental variable because what you'll find is that the way that this library works is it's referencing that environmental variable all over the place. And so you'll end up hard coding it all over the place. So it's not recommended. So use the environmental variable. All right. So we are back in our root directory. Now we're ready to go. So the first thing that we need to do is run the posts.embed command. And so what this does is this goes through the records that you have previously, and it sets up the vectors for those records. So basically, it almost makes it more friendly for our large language model to interact with it. It's kind of magical, honestly. So let's just go ahead and run it. So it sets up the vectors. So now what you'll see if I do post dot first, it now has this new, in addition to our original body and title field columns, it now has the embedding columns. So those embedding columns um, are used by the system. Now I can say post, so I can do similarity search. So now you don't have to be so clever when you're searching your posts, for example. Um, now you don't have to be so clever when you do your search. You can say, I want to do a search for Langchain. Okay. Now you could write a query, but you can also, be a lot more convoluted in what you're searching, and it would still find what you're looking for. Okay. So I can do post similarity search. And so it's actually going to, it finds that record. So it returns an array of those records. And it finds that entry. So super cool. I said find Langchain demo. Um, Now if I did the same thing with Nanobot, or let's just do Nano. So this is actually making a large language model call. It's not just searching your database. It's making it's passing information to a large language model. It's processing it. It's understanding, what it's searching for. So it's kind of cool. Now that's just so. But what I think is really cool is this post that asks. So now you can ask questions about the data that's in your model. Okay. Um, so right now this is searching your entire database or all your posts. Now you can set this up like you would a query. Like you could do the dot where, and you could filter what is being analyzed for the questions that are being asked. So if you're using a multi-user application and you don't want people to ask questions about other people's data, you can filter it like you would a regular query, and then tap on your ask at the end of it. At least that's how I understand it. So post ask, tell me more about Langchain. So I'm just asking a question to the model, and it's going to go out and it's going to do its thing, and it's going to come back with a response. So it gives me quite a long description. I didn't write that much text, but it came back with that text. Um, so I could do the same thing. Tell me more about nanobots. All right. Um, so this is the first part of this video series. So it's going to be kind of long. I'll do another one that follows up on this and shows you how to set these up, how to actually use this. But the cool thing about this is that you now have set up a function in your database that can interact with your data set. You can later you can use these. You can apply those functions as tools to your large language model that it can call upon. So the next video will be how to set up an assistant and how to use the tools for Lanchain.rb. I think that's really where the money is, but since this was so much content that we had to get through to do just the basics, I thought it was important to do this first and to kind of break it up. So I appreciate you watching this, and hopefully this helped. I will post the instructions with this somehow that I've put together so you have it, because it's a lot. And, it's kind of frustrating that things are so difficult to do the most basic thing, but that's just where we're at. So anyways, I appreciate you guys. I hope you enjoyed, and that's it.